Good morning. Today we'll discuss preface of lyrical ballads or preface to the lyrical ballads. The lyrical ballads, as we already know, was a collaborative effort. Both Wordsworth and Coleridge were inspired to produce this book of poetry through many intellectual conversations. Only 4 poems in lyrical ballads are written by Coleridge, and all remaining are written by Wordsworth. After the lyrical ballads was written, Coleridge wanted to write a preface so that he could clarify his poetic style and eliminate many criticisms that were coming to light about their new writing. In one of his journal entries on the topic, Coleridge mentions the artificiality and impermanence of poetic fashion with aristocratic taste. He wanted the public to know that his and Wordsworth's poetry was more real and therefore would be more everlasting. Since it was his idea, Coleridge was supposed to write the preface, but he never did, leaving Wordsworth to write it under a very harsh time crunch. He had little time to write a preface for the lyrical ballads. So, even though the lyrical ballads was a collaborative effort, it was only Wordsworth who added the preface in the year 1800 edition and refined it in 1802. After its publication, Coleridge's disagreement with Wordsworth's preface began to surface through his writing of Biographia Literaria as well as other letters and essays. Coleridge's opinions do not clash completely with Wordsworth's, but there are definite disparities among the two. In this, we will try to bring out the major points where Coleridge is not in accord with Wordsworth and how this gives a sense of each poet's poetic style. In Wordsworth's 1880 preface, he sets out his poetic position. He emphasizes various points stating his opinion regarding poetry of the time. So here we'll focus on the ordinary, the role of poetry and the poet, and the poet's response to public taste and opinion. These may be not the main issues or the important issues of the preface, however, they are the issues that illustrate visible gaps between the two poets. So, the emphasis on the ordinary. In the preface, Wordsworth describes his desire to break away from the over-decorated style of the 18th century and create a comprehensible art form for the ordinary man. This is similar to what even Coleridge claims about the artificiality of aristocratic taste. Where they differ, though, is under the topic of meter and personification. In breaking away from the over-decorated style, Wordsworth states that personifications of abstract ideas rarely occur in these volumes and are utterly rejected as an ordinary device to elevate the style and raise it above prose. Instead, Wordsworth wants to emphasize and adopt the language of men, which rejects personification as a mechanical device of style or as a family language which writers in meter seem to lay claim to by prescription. This we can find on page number 9 of the preface. Conversely, Coleridge states that he believes that poetry should have some passion, and that passion is present in meter. He claims that this was also stated to Wordsworth, but believes that it was not accurately represented in the preface. Coleridge understood that Wordsworth's assignment was, as Coleridge quoted, to write poetry that would propose to himself as his object to give the charm of novelty to things of every day and to excite a feeling analogous to the supernatural by awakening the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and directing it to the loveliness and the wonders of the world before us. Unquote. It is said by Coleridge. In other words, we can say that Wordsworth was to awaken the romantic beauty of nature to his readers. But when the second edition was published, Coleridge thought that Wordsworth's poetry is heterogeneous. In this preface, Coleridge claims that Wordsworth extends this style of poetry to all kinds and rejects poetry that does not include the language of real life. Wordsworth proceeds to define a permanent poetic voice that should not reflect those of wealth and importance. Coleridge disagrees with this completely. He believes that common language does not apply to all classes and therefore should not be practiced. It is also evident that Coleridge and Wordsworth differ in writing style. Wordsworth, with his lack of poetic diction, versus Coleridge's formal style of writing. Coleridge explains that Wordsworth cannot adequately and accurately write to different classes of men, so instead writes to the lowest denominator of taste. This personal attack at Wordsworth's ability leads many to believe that Coleridge's clarifications of the preface are more nearly refusals. So, the next difference that we see in both the poets is the role of poetry and the poet. The ordinary man, Wordsworth believes, is close to nature and therefore closer to human nature. To succeed in directing poetry toward the ordinary man, Wordsworth must address the significance of language in his poetry as well as the effects of poetry on the reader. This leads to the discussion of the poet's role, where Wordsworth claims he, being a poet, is capable of educating the reader by his ability to be affected by absence. The poet is a man speaking to men, whose language should not fall short of that which would be heard by men. So, the opinion of these men differ among Wordsworth and Coleridge. Coleridge thinks the role of the poet should maintain some of the previous ideals of poetry regarding language rather than completely change to a language of lowly men. The role of poetry is where both writers seem to agree. Wordsworth and Coleridge believe the purpose of poetry is to stir passion in the reader. However, their methods are slightly different. Coleridge agrees that being a poet does not take the imagination and the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, but it also requires good sense, which is the body of poetic genius. Then is the response to the public taste. This new trend of poetry created by both Wordsworth and Coleridge in lyrical ballads led to many criticisms. The readers of this time were set in their ways, accepting elegant, aristocratic writing styles. These criticisms were evident to Wordsworth and Coleridge, who showed separate reactions. The last 10 paragraphs of the preface speak of Wordsworth, quote, faith in the educative taste of the public, unquote, and ask that the reader to judge lyrical ballads by his own feelings and not by reflection upon what will probably be the judgment of others. Coleridge has negative opinions towards public taste and claims that public taste is to be despised. He also wrote a memo in his journal saying he will write an essay on public taste in the future. So, we can see that this shows that Wordsworth is more humbled by criticism rather than frustrated by it, while Coleridge remains arrogant, believing that only his opinion is educated. So, we can see here the major difference between Wordsworth and Coleridge, that Wordsworth was more humble, he was much closer to the ordinary men, he wanted to write about the imagination, nature, things, simple things of life, while Coleridge was much more into the imaginary world and was a little bit arrogant about the ideas, the opinions of people. This is the main difference between the two poets. Thank you.